Hello everyone, Professor Quizzlook here. So I wanted to make another video, this time about levels of analysis when it comes to international relations. So in my previous video we looked at, from a 30,000 foot level, everything we talk about in these videos, we could dig deeper into the scholarship. But these are really just designed as introductory videos, getting us thinking about political science and getting us thinking about different aspects. And here, the different levels of analysis for international relations. So when we're conducting research, we're digging into international relations. There are different levels, these levels of analysis in international relations. So the levels of analysis framework really helps scholars, helps policymakers understand the multiple forces shaping international relations. It allows us to isolate and examine the different levels, as well as layers, as we'll see the individual, the state, and the system at which causes of foreign policy decisions and international outcomes operate. So that's a mouthful, pulled from the OpenStax Introductory to Political Science textbook. So let's dig and think a little bit deeper about what that actually means. So when we're conducting international relations, we're trying to make sense of how states, how non-state actors, how NGOs are engaging with each other and trying to make sense of this anarchic world. So the first level of analysis that we can choose to utilize is at the individual level, which focuses on people, oftentimes the political leaders, the decision makers. In an autocracy or a democracy, if you're at the individual level of analysis, it examines how their personal characteristics, beliefs, and decision-making styles affect international outcomes. So the individual level has come in and out of style. Some scholars focus on the individual, others have not. Just as an antidote, I think we are starting to see a little bit more in maybe in the news, people focusing on the individual level. And this is often, I think, driven by Donald Trump's large personality, that analysts and folks in the policy community are focusing on, okay, how's Donald Trump view the world? How does Donald Trump look at the world around him? And this is all at the individual level of analysis. Maybe we've never even thought of it that way. We're just like, okay, this scholar, this news personality is looking at Donald Trump. International relations scholars say, okay, well, the individual plays a big role in shaping public policy. So they might look at like cognitive psychology, how leaders perceive threats and opportunities. So if you're watching this, you will look at the world differently than I will, and you will look at the world differently than your classmates. That's just how human beings are. So at the individual level of analysis, scholars are like, okay, well, what role does that individual play? What are those leadership traits? Do they have risk tolerance? Do they have a need for power? Are they power hungry? Are there beliefs about control? Or they can look at decision-making models. Is the leader supposedly a rational actor? So again, at this individual level, the focus is on oftentimes the leader, or at least those in charge, maybe the decision makers, maybe it's a small group. So some examples of this, we can look at Vladimir Putin. His nationalist ideology and views of Russia as a great power have shaped Russia's policies in regards to Ukraine, to Georgia, and in Syria. Putin's personal experiences in the KGB and his perceptions of NATO as a threat influence his foreign policy. So when we think about Vladimir Putin, if we're thinking about Russian foreign policy, maybe the scholar will point to Vladimir Putin. And there are books and books and books about how Vladimir Putin perceives the world and how Vladimir Putin looks at the world. This is all through the prism of this individual level. Okay, with that idea then, if it was a different leader in power, outcomes would be different because their perceptions of the world, their perceptions of NATO would be different. Their worry that NATO is a threat would be different. So scholars using this level of analysis will focus on these leaders and say certain leaders have these characteristics. And as I mentioned, there is an emerging group of scholars and talking heads that will look at Donald Trump. And they will think about how he emphasizes transactional diplomacy, how Trump shows suspicion of multilateralism, and how his ideas of his being critical of the rest of the world shapes American foreign policy. So at the individual level, we can understand looking at the leaders, looking at their cognitive traits, and trying to make sense of why states make the decisions they do based on the leader that those states have. Other scholars look at the state level, which we can think of as like domestic politics level, which explores how internal characteristics of the state, so focusing on the state, such as political institutions, regime types, bureaucratic politics, interest groups, and how they shape public policy. So here, stepping away from the idea of the individual and instead looking at the characteristics of the state. Is it a democracy? Is it an authoritarian regime? And how then does that shape a state's foreign policy? So we see that states often have more constraints on foreign policy. And we can think about why. Why would a democracy have more constraints on foreign policy? Well, the idea, and scholars that look at this say public opinion or congressional oversight keep the leader in check. That in a democracy, that a leader is accountable and has to answer to the population, they are less likely to get involved with adventurous foreign policy because it might not be popular at home, and then they will get voted out. Whereas scholars argue that in an authoritarian regime, where the autocrat, the leader, the small group of people are less answerable to citizens. It doesn't mean they're not answerable at all. They're worried about a popular uprising. They're worried about elite defection. But you're not going to win that next election. You're not going to lose that next election in an authoritarian regime. So if you get into that adventurous foreign policy, it might not matter. So at this level of analysis, you're looking at the state. You're seeing what the internal dimensions of the state are. So also, when we're thinking about this level of analysis, interest group influence, lobbyists, corporations can shape trade, environmental, and military policy. So the third level of analysis that IR scholars can choose to look at is what it's considered the international level. So the systemic level, the international level, which focuses on the structure of the international system and how it constrains or incentivizes state behavior. This level is concerned with the distribution of power, the anarchy of the system, again, no central authority in the global environment, and norms that govern international behavior. So let's think about some of the key concepts. Realism. So in another video, I'll talk about different types of IR scholars. Here, realism emphasizes the power distribution and security competition of the world. Do we have a bipolar, a unipolar, or a multipolar world? Liberalism highlights the role of international institutions, cooperation, and interdependence, and constructivism focuses on norms, identities, the social construction of international system. So I'll make a separate video digging a little deeper into those ideas, those different theories of IR. So we'll dig a little deeper into the systemic level in a different video. Just to summarize, I try to keep videos shorter, but sometimes I get talking. So the individual level looks at like the cognitive psychology, the leadership traits, decision-making models. And then the state level, domestic politics, looks at the big takeaway here is in a democracy versus an authoritarian regime is what is the domestic politics within the state look like, and the systemic level focuses on the structure of the international system. So within IR, these are just different levels, different ways that scholars, policymakers try to make sense of how states are getting along, how states are interacting with non-government organizations, with non-state actors. So I'll make another video about realism and liberalism, dig a little deeper into that. I try not to make just one ginormous video, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you.